Frieren Beyond Journey's End is not only an anime that has taken over the anime media, but also media as a whole. Ever since it was announced that it was going to get anime adaptation, many people were hyping it up, and these people weren't wrong, because in just a matter of a few months, this has not only become one of the most popular animes of all time, but many people are considering it to be a modern classic, and it's going to be one of those animes that are going to be hard to forget because of just how memorable it is, from the characters to the visuals and just the overall themes that are shown in Frieren. And I can go on and on and on about what makes this anime so good and list the many reasons as to why so many people enjoy it, but that's not really going to be the main thing in this video. The main thing that I'll be talking about in this video is how Frieren managed to not only save the fantasy genre, but more specifically it managed to save the fantasy genre in anime. Now the reason why I'm saying this is because if you have been watching anime for a really long time or have gotten used to watching a ton of anime, you would know that there's one particular genre in anime that always seems to be a hit or miss, and that is of course the isekai genre. And most importantly, the isekai genre tends to always use fantasy elements in their stories, and because of that, it's always been a divisive conversation whenever people talk about isekai. Some people love it, some people hate it, some people think it's probably one of the best things to come out of anime, while others think it's one of the worst things to come out of anime. And because of this, both sides seem to always have reasonings and make a bunch of points as to why they believe what they believe, and sometimes they're good, while others they're clearly not so great reasonings. But apart from that, this is always something that's always being talked about whenever people mention the isekai genre, and that is always the fantasy elements. Fantasy has always been an interesting topic because who doesn't like seeing a story that involves magic and sorcery and stuff like that, but for some people it has become very boring or something that's not worth watching, and that's because most of the time it's because of isekai. Depending on how the isekai is using the fantasy elements, this plays a huge factor on what people think about the fantasy genre as a whole, especially in anime. And this isn't me, of course, saying that all the fantasy elements that are used in isekai are handled poorly or done incorrectly, because there have been a handful of isekais that have managed to use the fantasy elements correctly. But this is where it makes things completely different with Frieren, because it uses the fantasy elements into completely different things, and the way they are used are nothing compared to what we usually see involving fantasy. Frieren is not only a great example as to how you're able to use fantasy elements to not only make an impactful story, but also to show us the many different things that not a lot of fantasy series tend to always show, and that is the life of the characters in this fantasy world. And Frieren manages to do that with just simply its main character to begin with. Frieren is the main character of this story, and what makes it bittersweet about her life is how even though she is an elf and she's able to live for a really long time, being able to live a long time is not always a great thing, because as she experiences herself, many of the people that she forms connections with or has a relationship with, they all are not going to live as much as her. Everyone has a different lifespan, and this becomes very obvious with many of the friends and many of the connections that she makes with people who are from the human race. This is something that not a lot of fantasy shows in anime show a lot, or they don't really go into too much detail about it. They don't show how many of the different races of a fantasy world have different lifestyles, and how those lifestyles can not only be a positive thing but also a negative thing as well. And this becomes very obvious with Frieren's life, because even though she does live for a really long time, and who knows when she'll be able to pass away, because of how long her lifespan is, she doesn't really understand the value of life. She doesn't really understand why so many people always make it a habit to cherish every moment in their life, because due to her living for so long, those kind of things have never crossed her mind. But that all completely changes when not only does she meet people that will change her life forever, but also change her mindset of life as a whole. And this is, of course, I'm talking about none other than Himmel, Aizen, and Hyder. These people would not only change Frieren's life forever, but also would change her mindset as a whole, because this will be the party that would not only be an impact in history in their world, but will also be the group of people that Frieren will never forget. This party will pretty much be the main reason as to why the demon lord of their world no longer exists, which is an element that is oftentimes used in many fantasy stories. But what makes Frieren so different is how the main story isn't about how this party was able to defeat the Demon Lord, but it focuses on the life after the Demon Lord has been defeated, which is a direction that not a lot of fantasy stories tend to always take. Usually in these kind of stories, they will make a bunch of characters pretty much have their objective goal to be to defeat the Demon Lord. But not in this series. This series takes place after that all happened, and we're just here to see how these characters are living their lives after that, which makes this series all the more a breath of fresh air because we are seeing so many characters living their lives with peace and not having to worry about an evil cutting that shortly because they were able to defeat it. But unfortunately, the majority of Frieren's group isn't going to last forever. They all are going to pass away except for Frieren because of her lifespan. And it makes it even more emotional when one by one, not only is Himmel the first one to pass away, but also Heiter. And you can see that even though Frieren doesn't tend to always express herself all that often or show emotions, that becomes different with these group of people because these people meant so much to her and changed her in a way that when she saw them pass away, you can tell that while she may not have shown it on the outside, on the inside, she probably was feeling sadness and grief that these people that were a part of her life are no longer here. And while there is one remaining member, this being Eisen, who is a dwarf, they both know that Frieren is pretty much going to be the last member to survive due to their different lifespans. But despite both of them knowing this, that doesn't stop them from just going on with their lives because they can't stop the inevitable, and that is something that they both learned through Himmel. Despite Himmel being a human, you could tell just how much of an influence he had on Frieren and on Eisen. Beforehand, both of these people didn't tend to always see the value of life or why these people tend to always do things before they pass away. But with Himmel, their line of thinking completely changed, as Himmel always taught them that not only was it great to create memories with the people you care and love, but to also make sure that you are never forgotten, because if you don't make memories and you don't have people to remember those memories, you are pretty much going to be forgotten as soon as you pass away. So even though he is fully aware that he is not going to last that long and that he is going to reach a point in his life where he will not exist, he still wants to make the most of his life, making sure that not only does he create memories for himself, but to also make sure that the people around him don't forget him and are able to carry his legacy, which in fact was something that became true, because throughout the series, even though Himmel is no longer in the story, his many flashbacks with him show us that Himmel was such a great guy, but also a very heavy influence to Frieren and to the many people around him. And I really like how the anime uses these flashbacks that shows Frieren with her original party, because they're not used just to waste time or to just use it for filler for the episode. They're used to not only show us how Frieren's life was like with this party, but also show us the many personalities and the many beliefs that all of these characters had when they were all together. And these flashbacks aren't used randomly. They're used when Frieren is in a very similar situation as she used to be with her original party, or is just trying to remember what would Himmel have done if he was here today. It's these moments that greatly remind us once again that no matter how long time has passed, your legacy or your existence as a whole is something that is going to be very hard to forget. Which is why when you see Frieren form her own group with characters like Fur and Stark, you see her pretty much doing the exact same thing that Himmel would have done, and that is to create memories, having these very adventures with them and taking everything nice and slow. She never rushes her adventures with them. She never does anything that will make them view her very negatively, because that is not something that she wants to do. That is not something that she wants them to remember her as a terrible person. So every time they are all spending time together, they're making sure that they're not just experiencing life, but also able to cherish everything that's around them. And that's what makes this anime so special, because it's not just seeing action scenes or seeing just how powerful Frieren is, because while there are moments that show us what Frieren is capable of and shows us why she's a powerful mage, that's not the core theme of this anime. The overall lesson that Frieren tries to show, not just to the viewer but to the whole audience, is to appreciate life. No matter who you are or where you came from, everyone should see the beauty in life, and everyone should cherish their life and not take it for granted, because one day you will no longer exist. And while that may seem dark and very unsettling, it's the reality. Everyone in life will cease to exist, and that's not just you yourself, but also the many people around you that you are in contact with are also not going to exist in the near future. And while that may be a scary thing for some people to realize, it isn't all just something that you should be worried about, because like Frieren taught us, is that as long as you're able to create these great memories with a lot of people and leave a mark in life, it's going to be hard for a lot of people who are still alive to forget about you. And that is why relationships in Frieren are so important. It isn't just two characters hanging around for no reason. It's two characters enjoying each other's companies and hoping it lasts till the very end, which is why the relationship between Frieren and Fern is so special. Is because you can tell that these two girls clearly adore each other and are very grateful to have by each other's sides. And even though they may not be perfect and they will have their struggles as time passes, it's all okay, because as long as they have each other, nothing can stop them. And this goes as well for the relationship between Fern and Stark, because even though they have two complete different personalities, you can tell that the time that they spent with each other has not only become memorable, but it's something that makes them become more closer as time passes on. And that is something that I wish I could see with other series. We don't see a lot of times other series dive deep in the relationships with the other characters, or we don't see the characters appreciate one another. It's usually brushed off, or if there is a very memorable moment between characters, it usually doesn't last that long. But with Frieren, every character's interaction is important, and every character's moment with another character is just as important as well, because relationships is one of the things that makes Frieren such a very impactful story and such a great anime to see, which is why you weren't bothered seeing Frieren, Stark, and Fern as just the main characters, and you see a bunch of journeys with them, because that's just how well written they are. But of course, like any other series, there's always bound to be new characters, and the new characters, while some didn't last as long as some others, they still left a huge mark in the series. And it goes to show us how in the right hands, any character of that series can become just as memorable as the main characters of that story. Which may not sound as a big deal for some people, but you have to take in consideration that some characters in different series tend to always be forgotten or not really well received because of how minimal their existence impacts the story. But not in Frieren, because no matter how many new characters are introduced, they all stand out in some sort of way, whether it's their personalities or their way of thinking. There's just something about that character that makes you not want to forget about them, and you want to learn more about that character, their past, their beliefs, why do they believe the things that they believe, and what's their overall goals. And this is something that played a huge role in the second core of Frieren during the first class mage exam arc, in which Frieren and Fern decided to go and take an exam to become first class mages. And of course, this will lead to other mages as well being in that exam as well. And there are many moments in which we could see how Frieren and Fern interact with these new characters, but we also get to see how these new characters interact with one another, in which normally this would take a lot of moments or a lot of interactions to like these characters. And Frieren, in just a few moments, we got some very great characters that really took the spotlight and even became some of people's favorite characters as well. Of course, there are some characters that you want to learn more of, and then there are some characters that obviously became favorites for different reasons. It just goes to show us that if done right, these new characters can instantly become favorites for a lot of people and become just as memorable as Frieren, Stark, and Fern. So with these reasons alone, it's no wonder why Frieren was able to save the fantasy genre of anime. It didn't need to have some sort of big antagonist or some big battle or big stakes in every moment. That is something that we oftentimes see with too many series, especially with fantasy elements as well, where we always need to have a big threat or something at stake in order to make the story interesting. That is not what always needs to happen, and Frieren is a great example of it. It could be a slice of life, slow-paced show that can be just as impactful as those other stories as well. While there are people that don't like slow-paced shows or like having to always see a lot of interactions between characters, that's what makes Frieren all the more special. It's a series that shows us that every interaction is important and how all the little details do matter. If it's slow-paced, then that's okay, because it's going to play a huge role in the near future And it could also lead to more character development with not just the main characters but also with other characters of the story as well. I think it's fine if Frieren is slow paced because it just works, and that's something that I wish other series can do as well, where we don't need a million different things happening just in order to catch people's interest. And I really do hope that there's more Frieren content in the future, because with just how popular it has gotten, a season 2 announcement isn't going to be surprising. But yeah, that's pretty much where I'm going to end today's video. This isn't going to be the last time I'll be talking about Frieren, because there's a lot of things that are worth talking about, and I do plan on making videos about this series in the near future, so look forward to that. But yeah, that's about it. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time.